Welcome back, listeners. Joining me again today is Michael as we deep dive into how companies can effectively adapt to sustainability and ESG initiatives, building on the insights from our last episode.
Mike, let's look at companies which are smaller businesses and startups. There is enough and more conversation that's been happening, including some of the recent global conferences, which are focusing on how crucial smaller startups and businesses need to embrace sustainability. You do know we have a specialist team in India, Step Up, which provides communication solutions to startups. So let us, just talk about them and how important do you think it is for the startups and smaller businesses to have strong ESG practices built given that supply chains and customers are really looking for this for these credentials.
It's really interesting you say that, because that was actually, and COP29 that just kind of wrapped up. There was a bit more of a limelight than usual on SMEs and the role that they play. And, I think often when we're talking about, climate and decarbonisation and these really big kind of global issues, we think governments, we think big industries, we think big financial institutions, multilateral development banks, and all these kind of big players, which are obviously crucial. But when we look at SMEs, 90% of all business supply chains are made up of small to medium-sized businesses, and they account for 60% of the jobs worldwide, according to the UN. So they have a fundamental role to kind of come on this journey. Like you kind of alluded to, and, like I was talking about before, in terms of being able to survive as an SME, to some degree, they have to kind of understand and go on that sustainability journey, because essentially that's what they're going, that's some of the questions and some of the criteria that is only going to grow in the kind of the tenders that they try to win and their customers that they're trying to win. There's always a balance between what they, have the resources, both, from a financial perspective and just from a human kind of capital perspective, in terms of how much effort that they can throw at this thing. And what is quite difficult for SMEs sometimes, and absolutely acknowledge this, is that, when we think about data and we think about getting information, obviously big companies with big budgets can kind of spend that time and get that information, whereas SMEs just might not have that kind of capacity to source the data, whether it be an environmental issue related to their business, whether it be a social issue relevant to their business. They just might not either have the time or the influence. So I worked with a lot of small companies that were trying to find out specific pieces of information related to an environmental issue or a social issue, from their own suppliers. And because they're so small, they don't really have a lot of influence over those suppliers. So
that's correct.
Often, their requests for information, kind of fall on deaf ears. And that's a real challenge for them. I think the positive note is that this is really kind of well understood in the market now in terms of the challenges that SMEs face. There's a lot of kind of free, software that's always being developed that allows SMEs to tap into that to, whether it be to undertake a more accurate measurement of their own impacts, or whether it be to tap into kind of global databases that they can, pull into their own business, whether it be to, develop kind of off-the-shelf policies or strategies that they can utilize to kind of accelerate their progress to, addressing sustainability issues. There's a lot of, support and frameworks and tools that are being developed to essentially, to help SMEs kind of drive their own sustainability journey. But I think most important thing I would say is that, again, regardless of, the sector that you're in, or, regardless of the kind of the size of your business, being able to demonstrate that you've integrated, sustainability as part of the core purpose of you as a business in today's kind of operating environment can only help you as a business succeed. Ignore it at your own peril, if that makes sense. Because I think, like I said earlier, the idea of ESG, sustainability, however we want to refer to it, it's not like a nice thing for companies to do anymore. It's not just a nice additional thing. It's really, we're moving to that point of it's part of BAU. And I think that's the important takeaway here, is that ESG really is BAU. But how it looks for different, for companies based on their size, based on their sector, is obviously going to be different. But I think for every business, it's we need to consider that as part of their kind of BAU operating environment.
Mike, that's very well captured. Ignore at your peril. I think that makes immense sense. And I'm going to shift gears now to Burson and how sustainability and ESG is a core focus for Burson to help companies drive their purpose and build and strengthen reputation. How do you see Burson focus on ESG through its portfolio of services, and how is Burson driving its ESG value proposition? Would you like to throw some light on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you introduced at the start, the whole kind of framework of Burson is essentially to help companies build that reputational capital. And when we think about, everything that I've literally just said around, ESG being integrated into essentially the purpose of a business, you can't build reputational capital without considering your environmental and your social, impacts, both internally and externally, and demonstrating that you have good governance as a business to manage those. And so I think it's really exciting to have that kind of reputational angle at the core of Burson, because essentially what that does is it puts that kind of concept of sustainability and social impact at the very heart of what Burson do. And our team work across, as obviously as people listen to this podcast would know, the variations, the different services that Burson have, whether it be creative strategy, whether it be digital, whether it be media relations, whether it be government relations, consumer. Sustainability essentially forms, is part of every one of those services.
Right.
Because there is always that sustainability lens or consideration that has to be addressed, before you help a company kind of build that reputational capital. It has to form kind of part of the backbone of, I guess.
Right. So, Mike, just building on that, it's important to make sure that companies are driving real progress in ESG, particularly through effective measurement and communication. Knowing where to start and what to prioritize is one of the biggest challenges that companies face. I would love to hear your thoughts, and our listeners would love to hear your perspectives on what are the key areas that businesses should focus on when it comes to prioritizing ESG and measuring ESG impact.
Yeah, I think it's probably important to acknowledge it. It can seem daunting, depending on, the size of your business and, where you're at, or the geographical kind of area that you're operating in. Obviously, that will impact, the level of scrutiny and the level of kind of attention. If a company is really just kind of starting out and wanting to know, well, how do they focus? Well, what should they focus on? I think, what's a really important step, and it almost kind of just sounds like a logical starting point, but again, sometimes it helps to have it framed out, is what we call a double materiality assessment. And really what that is doing is that as a business, you are looking at what is the environmental and social and governance risks and opportunities that are relevant to my business. And when we say double materiality, what we're meaning by that is, what is the kind of financial material impact of those environmental and social and governance risks, and what is the broader societal impact of those, so on both people and planet. So there's something called a double materiality assessment that we undertake with our clients. And essentially what that does is it starts broad, and it looks at all the different kind of environmental, social, governance risks that are relevant to that business based on, the industry, based on where they operate. And we engage the stakeholders, both internal and external, to get their point of view. And we really kind of drill down into all of that. And what we come out at the other end is essentially a heat map that charts where those environmental, social and governance risks and opportunities kind of sit. And what that does is really gives us a nice simple visual to say, okay, these areas are where I need to focus on for my business. And what you essentially then go and do is build strategies around addressing those. And that in itself, there will be technical pieces to deliver. There will be really strong communication pieces to deliver as part of that. And if you're a regulated company, then again, in some ways, it's actually kind of easier if you're regulated, because you just go and look at whether it's the BRSR, whether it's China's CSR guidelines. You're going to go look at essentially, what they're telling you to do, and they lay it out in quite a transparent, kind of easy to follow process. But I think what I would say is that it has to be more than a target. And maybe I'm talking about this because I've just, had my head in COP29 for a couple of weeks. But
right.
What we hear time and time again is, even countries and companies, whatever it may be, it's all well and good to have a target. Let's just say a net zero target, but you've got to have that kind of roadmap of how you're going to get to that target, and you've got to be able to roll that out. And it's not just kind of what I touched on at the start. It has to be more than data. You have to be able to have really strong kind of communications and creativity to really get the buy-in that you need from the business. Because I think that, from my background, coming from more of that kind of technical, kind of scientific background,
sure,
often, we'd give companies a lot of really good data, and then we would scratch our heads at why they haven't done anything, with all of this good information that we've just given
sure.
them. And what's really important is that you have that communications to back up that information, to say, okay, well, this is what it means. This is what it means to your staff. This is what it means to your leaders. This is what it means externally. This is how we can drive really positive and creative campaigns that demonstrate, the good work that you're doing, again, transparently, with credibility, and so I think whilst it might seem hard, whilst it might seem, there's capital outlays, what it does give you is it allows you to have credibility as a business within the market. So I think that, I guess my advice would be start broad, and then narrow into what's relevant to your business, and then build roadmaps around that. And then from that, there's going to be a lot of really powerful communication that you can start to develop internally and externally.
So, Mike, all of this sounds complex. So my last question is for our listeners: how can Burson and Burson's expertise guide our clients and companies in navigating these complexities around ESG, particularly reporting?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it does sound complex, and we obviously always try to break it down, as simply as possible. And I think when we think about Burson's sustainability and social impact offering, we've got a really nice, simple way of framing it, in that we help companies to build reputational capital. We help companies do things better, which means they can say things
right.
well. We kind of talk about this say-do gap. Often there's companies that are saying things and then, but they're not backing it up by doing the things. And really, in its most simplistic form, that's essentially what we're helping companies to do. We're helping them do things better, which allows us to then help them say more things well and build that reputational capital. I think there's a lot of ways to tap into where a client's at on their journey, and again, we work with clients that are, really just starting out.
Right.
On this journey, and that's where I'd go back to, really kind of starting off with those kind of materiality assessments. But we also work with companies that suddenly have to meet these regulatory requirements and are really struggling to understand them. So, I think, kind of framing out how we help companies, and we help them from a benchmarking and analysis perspective. We can really kind of help them understand the regulatory framework and build kind of that kind of gap analysis and understand what they're doing and what they're not doing. We can really help them kind of build the plan and develop that way forward and build approaches that will enhance performance and achieve impact. We can help them, whether it's from an advocacy perspective, whether they're kind of, a lot of companies might be quite hamstrung. They might want to decarbonize, but they might kind of, be waiting on that government policy or that kind of market to shift. And so, that's where that advocacy work, that the power of kind of driving driving that voice within industry, creating sort of societal value. And then obviously we do a lot of work in that reporting and disclosure piece. And so that's where, we really jump into the technical and help our clients understand exactly what they need to do, and how long it's going to take to do it, and how to kind of facilitate that, and often actually help to facilitate those technical pieces of work for our clients. So it does depend on where they're at on their journey, but I think what I would say is just, it all starts with a phone call or an email, and then it's as simple as kind of going from there, and building out that relationship.
Absolutely, Mike. This has been a very insightful discussion, and my top 3 takeaways are really: number 1, ignore at your peril. Businesses cannot afford to ignore sustainability. It's an integral part of value creation. Number 2, identifying sustainability priorities and measuring outcomes at every step are key to a successful ESG strategy. And we at Burson have the expertise and the experts who can partner with businesses in this journey. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us today and sharing this valuable information on sustainability and ESG. And we will keep this conversation going.
And Dana, it's been great. Thanks for having me.